What's up, friends? It's Professor Hevert, and we're going to go through a secondary source walkthrough this morning/afternoon. So, hello, good morning, and welcome to my home office. It doesn't look very serious in here between the game controllers, the video games, the drum set, and there's even a Snorlax to my right. But we're going to get into Daniel Immerwahr's How to Hide an Empire. Now, what I want to be clear about right here from the get-go is that this excerpt from Immerwahr's book is something that I myself put together. So if you're seeing this video and your professor has asked you to read the entire introduction or a chapter or the entire book maybe, this walkthrough isn't necessarily going to be for you. It might help you get started, but I don't want to make any claims to things being comprehensive here. So for my students, your job this week is to read this selection of Immerwahr's book. There's a longer section on Blackboard as well that I think it's the entire introduction and the chapter on guano, totaling about 30 some pages. This is much shorter. You can find it in the assignment itself. So what we do when we are looking at a secondary source is we want to do two read-throughs. We want to read for meaning, and then we want to read for the argument. So your first time through, what you're really doing is you're trying to figure out, all right, what's this about? What is the author, in this case, Daniel Immerwahr, trying to tell us about whatever? In this case, the title is a little bit indicative here. We're going to figure out how an empire is hidden. Now, once you've done that first read through, then you're looking for the arguments that Immerwahr makes. And we're going to go through this one bit by bit to really get at the arguments that Immerwahr is making. Often in academic works, there's an overall argument that the academic is trying to run throughout the whole book, but there are also sub-arguments too. And it's important to understand how those work together, because an overall argument is nothing if it doesn't have good, strong supporting arguments to walk the reader through those component parts that make up the whole. In this case, we're going to focus more on sub-arguments because there's really two things that are going on in this piece. And I will point that out in just a second. So when we begin our first read through, I'm going to pretend that you've already done that. The two things that we are going to notice, if we look at my little notes in the margins here, is that Immerwahr is going to talk about something called the logo map, and then he's going to start talking about guano. Now, if you've seen Ace Ventura, you might be familiar with the concept of guano. In this case, it's birds. In Ace Ventura, it was bats, but it can be both. Guano is just a shorthand for poop. But anyway, we'll get into that shit later. Lols. Okay, so let's focus on the logo map. And here, Immerwahr, the selection I picked doesn't really explain what he means by the logo map directly, so we've got to look through, and we're going to find the places where he does talk about the logo map. Essentially what he's arguing here is we tend to think of nations as the shapes that they are. So when we go and look at a picture of the United States, for example, we're pretty sure what the United States looks like. I'm going to bring one up just here real quick. Let me go ahead and switch my screen to the program window here. Okay. We're going to go to file window. No, let's just do the desktop. Let me transform that really quick. I'm resetting up OBS, so I apologize. Let's go ahead and transform that and fit to screen. All right. So when we're talking about the logo map, this is what we're talking about right here. So when we think of the United States as a shape, this is what we see in our minds. Okay, so you could say the same thing about states, the individual states, and you can say that about really any country that you want to. So what he's saying deeper in this piece is that we need to look a little bit beyond the logo map to find out how, when, and where a country, nation, might be expanding. So that's what he's getting at down here in this third paragraph. Is he's saying, look, you know, we built the continental United States, we finished all of that, but the puzzle wasn't finished. This silhouette captured the borders of the US for only 3 years because in 1857, not long after the Gadsden Purchase, which if you're here in El Paso, that directly affects you, when this was ratified, then the United States begins annexing islands throughout the Caribbean and the Pacific. And so we go from beyond the logo map to having these little dots all in the ocean. All right, so if you looked at the Caribbean, you could start seeing these little dots of U.S. territory that they didn't have before, and same thing in the Pacific. And by the end of the 19th century, the United States would own nearly 100 of these islands. Now, this is where Immerwahr starts to change the topic. So he's introduced the idea of looking beyond just the silhouette map, or what he calls the logo map. And now he's going to start talking specifically about the Guano Islands. These more than 100 of these islands that he was talking about, or almost 100 of them, that the United States had claimed in the previous paragraph. He wants us to know a couple of things. Number one, he says there's no indigenous peoples here, and when the United States went out and found these islands, they didn't have any strategic value. That's not going to change for a little bit, but it will change eventually. And he'll explain below. Now, he's saying that these islands were good for one thing and one thing only, getting this white gold bird shit. And I tried to draw a poop emoji and I can't draw, so all of that. Now, what we're going to get into here is really the key part of the argument in this piece. So let's take a look at this paragraph right here. The story of the Guano Islands may seem trivial. That's not the argument. After all, how important could a few dozen uninhabited islands be? That's not the argument. Okay, he's just setting us up here. Here's where the argument starts to unfold. Yet, despite all of that, the guano, I should say craze of the 19th century, left 3 legacies, all of which would shape the fate of the greater United States. So Immerwahr is telling us right here that the guano islands are important for 3 reasons, and he's going to tell us those reasons in just a second. And those the legacies of the guano islands is really what shapes the imperial history of the United States. So the next paragraph, what he's talking about is the first, he's introducing the first reason. So there's a legal legacy, and read all of the paragraph, but the main thing here is that there was a Supreme Court ruling that established that the borders of the United States needn't be confined to the continent, meaning that the lower 48 states, the continental United States, did not have to be the only territory that the United States could claim for itself. We could go beyond that silhouette. Now he's going to give us our second reason, or the second legacy, which is strategic. Now that might seem a little bit weird, because up here he says at the time these islands had no strategic value, but I said that that was going to change, right? So here is where he argues that yes, these islands ended up being strategic because decades later they're desirable sites for airfields, and that's going to be important during World War II. All right, so far they're legal. The legacy is legal because it extends the idea of what the United States can be. These islands are strategic because they will prove to be later during the Second World War. And then we go on to the next page, and Immerwahr is going to tell us the third legacy. And he says that this is the most immediate, so this was the one that was most short term, and he says that this was agricultural. So essentially, the companies or the speculators who go out and find these islands for their bird shit, they haul off 400,000 tons of this stuff. And why do they need all of that rock guano, the bird guano? Well, how does that relate to agriculture? He's going to tell us in this next paragraph. So what he's saying is that at the time, there wasn't a lot of other ways to refertilize soil. So he's saying that mined fertilizers like bird guano kept industrial agriculture sustainable long enough for scientists to devise a more permanent solution, which is manufacturing fertilizer, creating synthetic fertilizers. So here, what he's arguing is that going out and searching for these islands provides the United States with an agricultural solution to the problem of not being able to produce as many crops as necessary for the market. This helps reverse that. So, all in all, what we have is a powerful introduction to some ideas. And the big things that we need to take away, number one, the logo map. And if you want to read a little bit more about what Immerwahr has to say about the logo map, that's where my students, you go into Blackboard and read the longer piece. Or if you're not one of my students, I really recommend the book. It's It's fascinating in so many ways. You will learn so much from reading this book. It's incredible. And so we have the logo map. And then the second piece is, we'll just call this the legacy of guano. And Immerwahr says that there's a legal legacy, a strategic legacy, and an agricultural legacy. Agricultural. There we go. And let me scoot that up. So when you've reached this point, you've got a pretty good idea of what the argument is. And now your job as somebody who is interacting with this text is to think about it a little bit and write about what you think. Like, what did you think of the concept of the logo map? Was it something that you hadn't thought about before? Was it something that really stoked your interest? Was it something that you completely disagree with? That sort of thing. You kind of want, though, to get beyond the agree versus disagree binary. That's not always what academics is about. Like, oh, I agree with this, or oh, I disagree with that. It's, how does this idea influence the way I think? And that can be really a positive experience. And you use this idea of the logo map, for example, and apply it to other things. Or with the guano, you can argue against Immerwahr and say, well, does the United States really have an empire until it has control of certain peoples? And if that's the case, well, maybe since there's no inhabitants on these islands, maybe we really can't talk about the United States as an empire. Something like that. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. I hope that this was helpful. I want to do more of these as time goes on, and hopefully that will be a kind of a weekly thing. That's what I'm thinking of. So I'm going to be a YouTuber right now and say, you know what? If this video helped you out, give me a like. If you're new to the channel, most of this content is going to be related to my history classes. But if you like history and like the way that I explain things, hit that subscribe button. Go ahead. And, you can ring-a-ling the ding-a-ling bell if you want notifications. But none of that is required, of course. So have a great weekend and study history. See you later.